Harry and Meghan have been trending because of their new Netflix documentary, and there's a lot of things that I think that we should explore together. But before we get started, my name is Simone Saunders. I'm a licensed therapist and social worker in Calgary, Alberta. So hit that like button and subscribe, and let's get into it. Now, episode 1 is primarily about the love story between Harry and Meghan, as well as an understanding of the context of the royal family, how Harry and William grew up, and their history being in the public eye. First, I want to talk about Harry. He talks about his previous relationships and how the media had driven a lot of those relationships away. And he was left thinking, well, how am I ever going to find someone who would be in this world with me? And immediately what comes to mind for me is loneliness that he must be experiencing. Because as a celebrity or public figure or royalty, I can imagine that there's an intense feeling of loneliness knowing that you have to be very careful about who you associate yourself with. You have to be very careful about who you talk to, who you spend time with. And a lot of those things are very monitored. And even discussing his mother's death and how the expectation for him was to still be out and perform, to be smiling, not to be sad or crying, to make sure that he was still serving the public in some way. Now I want you to start imagining, especially as we discuss this whole series, what it would be like to actually be in their shoes. So imagine as a child, your parent just passed away, your mother just passes away, and you can't grieve in public. You're not supposed to cry in public. You're supposed to smile, you're supposed to wave, you're supposed to shake hands. And think about the dehumanizing nature of just celebrity culture and public figure culture as well. And as the episode continues, he talks about even when he was a teenager, he expected that there's a level of interest in him because of his position in the family and because of who his family is, but how difficult it was for him being chased down by paparazzi. Now I want you to imagine yourself as a teenager doing whatever it was that you were doing, because I know that I did some crazy things as a teenager too, and having people with cameras at every step of the way. The series then goes on to talk about Harry's time in Botswana, starting when he was 18 and how he felt very free, how he could live there and just be himself. And apart from it being a place where he could genuinely be his authentic self, he also found solace in the fact that he could continue some of his mother's work out there. And the reason why I think that this part is so crucial in the documentary in terms of understanding the whole picture is because I know that there's been a lot of narratives out there that Meghan forced him to leave the royal family, is forcing him to live this life, and is manipulating him and controlling him and all of these things. So I just want us to keep in mind that far before Meghan even entered the picture, in his teenage years, he had been wanting a normal life and had been seeking that out. So even in thinking about the bulk of their dating experience, a large majority of it was when they were not even public. And when they weren't public, they were doing things like visiting Africa and doing small trips and FaceTimes. And so again, to the narratives of Meghan just wanted to be this princess, that wasn't even what their relationship kind of started out being at all. So to be honest, when I saw the first episode, I thought it was beautiful that Harry could have that normalcy that he so truly desired throughout his entire childhood within at least the beginning of his relationship with Meghan. As well, there's been so many comparisons between Harry and Will, and I think that Will and Harry have had very different life experiences as well. Again, Harry spent a large portion of his time in and out of Africa with those people that he called his second family, whereas William did not. And the loss of a parent is an unimaginable experience for anybody, but let alone doing that in the public eye and also without great support. That would just exacerbate the trauma. The second episode goes on to talk more about Meghan's life and her experiences growing up as well as her career. And so I think that this is an important piece of the documentary as well, because Meghan, although an actress, led a fairly simple life. And by that I mean she was able to do a lot of purpose-driven work. She didn't necessarily find herself being swarmed by paparazzi all the time. She could live in a quiet neighborhood in Toronto and feel safe. So prior to even talking about the racism that Meghan experienced at the hands of the media, I really want to talk about her childhood, because I think it really all begins there, and I think that there's a lot of nuance to understand in her childhood in order to understand her experience in the press. At my practice, the clientele that we primarily serve are BIPOC folks. And in that, a lot of the clients that I work with are mixed race. And so a lot of the common themes that I hear and that I experience from our sessions is this polarity of feeling like you're not white enough, but you're not black enough. And I think that being a mixed race person in general comes with all of these identity pieces, but that is only exacerbated by not having parents or role models or people in your life that serve as mentors in terms of that racialized identity. So in the second episode, Meghan recounts an experience where she was driving with her mom and someone else had called her mom the N-word, and that was the first time that she'd ever even heard that word. That's an important piece. The fact that her mom did not say anything about it and did not talk to Meghan about it after, that's another very important piece. And later on, her mother talks about how she'd never had any conversations with Meghan about being mixed race. So when Meghan talks about being a minority but not being treated as a minority, let's remember that she grew up in California. Physically, Meghan has been perceived as racially ambiguous pretty much her whole life, especially living in California, having olive skin. When you grow up as a person of color, typically there are experiences that you have that make you aware that you are a person of color. Whether that be a conversation from your family or racism experienced at school or someone else asking about your skin color. There are just certain things that occur for people of color that make them aware of their identity as a person of color. For Meghan, she didn't have those experiences. And not only did she not have those experiences, but her mother also didn't talk to her about being a person of color. So if you're not treated like a person of color and you're not talked to about your identity being a mixed race person, then why would you think about those things? As a child especially, until racism occurs, like her mom being called the N-word. So again, if we look at it through a child's lens, her mom and her are very different skin tones. So Meghan, looking at herself, would see, I'm someone who is lighter, my mother is someone who is darker. My mother is being called the N-word because she is dark, because she is visibly black. That wouldn't necessarily feel like it applies to her, which makes sense, especially, again, thinking about these things through the lens of a child. Research substantiates that race-related stress and racism is traumatic. This is something that we already know. So in applying it to Meghan's situation, I think it's important to remember that having not necessarily experienced racism throughout her life, or at least racism that she can identify, experiencing it on a public platform would be more traumatizing because it calls into question your identity. You know that you're a person of color, but you've not experienced life as a person of color. And the reason that she hasn't is because of privilege, right? We know that those who are fair-skinned have more privilege in society. Those who are closer to whiteness have more privilege in society. So Meghan will always have more privilege, especially on the race spectrum, than her mother, for example, because physically her mother is darker and Meghan is not. Texturism plays into that as well. Meghan has finer hair that is closer to whiteness. So having experienced all these points of privilege throughout her life, it would be very shocking to the nervous system to all of a sudden read headlines that say Harry's girl is almost straight out of Compton, and other media outlets making racist remarks. I think that as consumers of media, it's very easy for us to say, this is what you signed up for, this is your life, you don't get to have privacy. And in wanting privacy, you shouldn't make a Netflix documentary, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. What we forget is that two things can be true at once. Always. You can want privacy and decide to share details of your life. You can love your family and decide that you need certain boundaries in order to be safe. You can experience racism but still benefit from white privilege. You can agree to a marriage with someone who is in the royal family and cognitively understand that there is a lot of pressure and publicity that goes with it and still struggle once you're in it. You can do things that people disagree with and deserve mental health care. You can do things that people disagree with and still your trauma is valid. I think the consumerism of media has desensitized us in a way to other people's experiences and made the public the judge and jury on whose hurts, whose traumas are valid or not. So as a therapist, when I look at this documentary and I analyze it, the things that I see are someone who struggled with suicidality and wasn't able to get help for that. I see a couple who wanted so badly to live a normal-ish life, to be able to raise their children and have different experiences than Harry had growing up. I see a couple who acknowledges that they will get hate regardless of the things that they're doing. And I see a couple who believes in prioritizing emotional and mental well-being, because I think that a lot of us can resonate with the experience of loving family members but also needing to keep them at somewhat of a distance in order to preserve our mental health. No matter how close we might want to be to them. We're not privy to absolutely everybody's side in this situation. But when people come and they say, you know what, this environment was not serving me, this environment felt like it was draining for me, it was exhausting for me, it was depleting my emotional and mental resources, and I had to leave, that you believed them. Because who are we to say that you should have stayed? Who are we to say that that's the life you were born into, so that's the life that you sign up for? Who are we to say that it doesn't matter what your emotional or mental state is? It matters what the public thinks and how the public can view you. Out of all of this, the lesson that I took away from it, and that I hope you're taking away from this video, is that some of the most painful choices that we will make are what's needed to preserve our mental health. Sometimes the relationships that we love and cherish the most are also the relationships that need boundaries in order to stay safe. Let me know what your thoughts are. Drop your comments down below. Hit that like and subscribe button. Let me know if there's any video recommendations that you have, and I will see you guys in the next video.